Russia's foreign minister Sergei Lavrov says Moscow will resume the Ukrainian grain deal if the West fulfills its commitments.
To ban or not to ban? The future of Ukrainian grain.
Simple yet effective. While lacking air power, the Ukrainian army has earmarked over €1 billion in drone expansion. Russia's foreign minister Sergei Lavrov insists Moscow will reactivate the Ukrainian grain deal when the West fulfills its commitments. Mr. Lavrov was responding to his Turkish counterpart Hakan Fidan in Moscow, who said the pact is essential for world food security.
Президент Путин неоднократно, официально, четко говорил, что как только будут приняты меры не по переговорам о российской части пакета Черноморского, но как только разговоры превратятся в конкретные решения, в тот же день мы готовы возобновить и украинскую часть зернового пакета.
The United Nations, the other mediator of the agreement, is also trying to put pressure on Russia. Secretary General Antonio Guterres sent Moscow a series of proposals to reactivate the deal.
A renewal that must be stable. I mean, we cannot have a Black Sea initiative that moves from crisis to crisis, from suspension to suspension. We need to have something that works and that works to the benefit of everybody.
Russia accuses the West of sanctioning its exports, such as agricultural products and fertilizers. Following the end of the grain export agreement, Ukraine is dependent on land routes and a shallow river port, which severely limits its grain export volumes.
The European Union should extend the temporary ban on duty-free imports of Ukrainian grain for 5 countries: Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, Hungary and Slovakia. This is the position of EU Agriculture Commissioner Janusz Wojciechowski, presented at a hearing of the EU Parliament's Agriculture Committee to solve the issue of Ukrainian wheat exports. Last year, Brussels agreed to a duty-free import regime for Ukraine to support the country's economy. But this year, Ukrainian imports drove down grain prices in Central Europe, causing tension among farmers.
I think that we need to prolongation to the end of the year. This is my position. It's necessary to approve on 27. My role is to give the information and to inform about the potential risk, which is not to in the option not to prolong the ban. No, we will have the next huge crisis in the frontline countries and in the market in these countries and crisis in the European Union.
The idea contradicts the official line of the European Commission, which originally intended to end the export bans on the 15th of September. Ukraine opposes the import ban vehemently. At the meeting, the Commissioner also proposed subsidies for Ukraine to compensate grain exporters with €30 per ton for their losses.
The other idea is to support the logistic, to support the transport of grain when it is transported to third countries. And there are ideas around to support a ton of, for example, a ton of wheat with €30, and this could be an incentive for traders to export it, to export that grain towards third countries.
However, this proposal has met with concerns from some members of parliament who believe the subsidies could distort the market.
On the battlefield, they have become indispensable. What the Ukrainian army lacks in air power, it makes up with drones. They record enemy movements and serve to fine-tune artillery fire. Kyiv has also used them to carry the war into Russian territory, striking targets hundreds of kilometers from the border, often striking fear into the population of Moscow. Ukraine has earmarked almost €1 billion for the purchase and manufacturing of drones for the army. And local companies like Air Logics have grown in the shadow of the fighting. The sector is experiencing an unprecedented boom.
We are soldiers here. making these UAVs for our armed forces. When we started after invasion, we were 6-8 people. Right now we're over 40 and hiring and extending.
Similar enterprises have also thrived. Drone Lab was formed at the beginning of the invasion to help the Ukrainian army with just one single engineer. Now there are 20 staff and more than 100 volunteers. They have also manufactured more than 1,500 drones and trained hundreds of soldiers to fly them.
EU foreign ministers want to boost the process of the enlargement of the European Union. At an informal summit in Toledo, Spain, they called for a meeting with their counterparts from Ukraine and the Western Balkans by the end of September.
I think that the war in Ukraine has had a collateral effect, that is to speed up the enlargement process, which is certainly a merit-based process. But at the same time, I think it's good to fix a political target, an horizon, in order to give a political impetus to the process. And also for us, because yes, we too have to be prepared for an enlargement that could affect to 10 more members of the European Union.
But as the prospect of Ukraine joining the bloc is becoming more of a reality, questions are raised as to how this can be done without putting the project of European integration at risk. Especially budgetary issues and problems of governance come to mind. Analysts see momentum for enlargement, but the EU needs to reform itself first.
Member states are only starting to realize and to grapple with the reality of what it implies of reform, what it will change from their own, how they benefit and how they need to contribute to the EU. So first is how Ukraine is able to reform itself, and what we're seeing is that they are really truly committed, and they have been a tremendous amount of work in 1 year span, which is quite impressive. But it's still unclear how the EU plans to do it, because there are a lot of questions on the decision making within the EU, on how to recalibrate different programs, for instance, of agriculture, with Ukraine being a major agricultural country.
Meanwhile, Hungary is still blocking the 8th installment of a €500 million military aid package to Ukraine. Budapest argues that Hungary's OTP bank's designation as a war sponsor is unacceptable.
Former US President Donald Trump has pleaded not guilty in Georgia of illegally trying to overturn the results of the 2020 election. On Thursday, he also said he'd skip the arraignment hearing that Fulton County Superior Court Judge Scott McAfee had set for next week. It means Trump will avoid dramatic scenes of high-security appearances with crowds of spectators. Trump and 18 others were charged earlier this month in a 41-count indictment alleging plans to subvert the will of Georgia voters.
Trump said in the 2016 campaign, I could shoot a man in the middle of Fifth Avenue in New York and people would still vote for me. And there are some Americans who will do that.
He was a media whirlwind in 2016, and in 2023, Donald Trump is back in the media spotlight with his criminal trials and his hopes of winning the 2024 presidential election again. The former president insists on his innocence and accuses the media of a witch hunt against him. That narrative resonates with his supporters, who are increasingly committed to his cause.
A conviction, or even just the indictments, probably hurts him more than helps him. However, in the primary process, in the nomination process, it's clearly helping him. It's taking attention away from the other candidates.
But the bigger issue with simply saying Trump is leading in the polls is that the media is buying into a basically a reinforcing narrative. What happens here is the media give all the attention to Trump. If the media actually made this a level playing field in terms of covering candidates and issues, rather than treating this as a circus with Donald Trump as the ringmaster, then you might get a true democratic process rather than one where the media effectively is an accomplice to what is an attempt by Trump to anoint himself as the Republican nominee.
Despite Trump's shadow continuously looming over the Republican candidates and overshadowing their electoral platforms, There's a broad understanding that the former president's figure remains crucial for winning the party primaries.
Well, there's an immediate answer regarding the Republican candidates in their debate on Wednesday night in Wisconsin, and why 6 of the 8 said, look, even if he's convicted, I support him becoming president. And that is that the political calculations for almost all the candidates is, if you say that Trump shouldn't take office, you lose any chance of getting voters who are Trumpists. And to be honest with you, that has been the phenomenon for the Republican Party since Trump became president in 2016.
Outside the Republican ranks, the national mood might be pointing in a different direction. A significant percentage of American citizens say it's time to turn the page, even for Joe Biden.
75% of American voters do not want a repeat of Trump v. Biden. 66% of Republicans don't want him to run again, and a similar number of Democrats don't want Biden. So I think a lot of Republicans will say it's time to move on.
India's Chandrayaan-3 lunar rover has confirmed the presence of sulfur at the moon's south pole. It's one of the elements detected in the first week of this historic lunar mission for India and raises new questions about its origin for Indian researchers. After descending from the lunar lander, the rover is also searching for signs of frozen water. Its mission is scheduled to last for 14 days, during which it will conduct several experiments.